Hi everybody, and welcome to our first video in Chapter 15. In this video, we're going to look at job order costing. And then in Chapter 16, we'll take a look at process order costing. There are several differences. So here, we'll get right into job order costing. We're going to look in this chapter at explaining how that works, how we cost them, how we use job cost sheets, and how we may even use that for pricing services. We'll look at how the flow of material costs in job order costing, the flow of labor costs in job order costing, and the flow of overhead costs in job order costing. Then an important part of that is going to be applied and factory overhead and how we close over-applied and under-applied factory overhead. So let's take a look at this. Here we're going to explain job order costing and job cost sheets. So process costing, as I mentioned, we will do in Chapter 16. Here we're looking at job costing and job order operations. These are more custom orders, diverse products and services, maybe low production volume, high product flexibility, and low standardization. Whereas with process operations, we have repetitive procedures, similar products and services, high production volume, low product flexibility, and high standardization. I worked in the food manufacturing business, for example, and we made frozen burritos in one of our divisions. And we made 1 million burritos a day. Admittedly, there was a 4-ounce and a 5-ounce burrito, and some different flavors, but it was repetitive procedures, similar products and services, high product volume and low product flexibility, high standardization. Perfect description of our burrito business. Whereas job order operations, when I worked for Chrysler Corporation, we made automobiles. Each automobile was a job, and we knew exactly how much cost for each automobile that we had. Okay, let's look in this at a little more depth. And here we have our job Bravo 15, Bravo 15 completed, and Bravo 15 delivered, an automobile. Here, Bravo 16 is completed and moved to finished goods inventory, but not yet sold. And job B17 is still in work in process inventory. Here, we're going to see in work in process inventory how we add direct materials, direct labor, and overhead costs. And there's 3 types of overhead cost: indirect materials and indirect labor, as well as other indirect costs, such as rent on the building and insurance for the building and things like that. So let's take a look at this in a little more depth. As far as cost flows in manufacturing go, 1, raw materials inventory. We can have direct materials. Those are materials that are used directly on the product and can be individually distinguishable. Whereas indirect materials are things like solvents or rags or maybe even lubricants, that kind of thing, that we don't necessarily have costs for on each product, but we put those in the overhead pool. Number 2, work in process inventory. That's the job that's being produced. Finished goods inventory is completed and ready to be sold. whereas cost of goods sold are goods that are sold. So we have subsidiary records that we store specific cost data about the manufacturing costs for each job. Here is the job cost sheet, and we'll go through this in a little depth here. Here's the direct materials for, we're building this alarm system for Carol Connor, and that's the alarm system and paint on a Ford Expedition. Okay, it tells you what the job number is and the date we expect to complete it. So here is the requisition number for the direct materials, and they cost $700. On March 12th, we had a time ticket for labor that was used, direct labor, on this particular product. And also on March 12th, we had an estimate of overhead, 160% of direct labor cost. We'll learn a little more about that here in a few minutes. And that cost $1,600. So our summary was materials, labor, overhead, total cost. And this is signed off by C. Luther, the supervisor. And he makes some remarks here that they completed this job on March 12th and delivered it to the customer on March 15th, meeting all specifications and requirements. Okay. So now we'll take a look at describing and recording the flow of material costs in a job order costing system. So here are our materials and labor cost. Materials received are recorded in a receiving report. The receiving report has the materials source documents, and then the material ledger cards are updated when the materials are purchased and issued for use in manufacturing. So here's our receiving reports, and we get all these materials, paint, speakers, alarm system here, material ledger card. And then here are the direct materials that go into these job sheets. And here's our jobs, job 17, 16, and 15. And it has materials, labor, and overhead in it. And then we also have our factory overhead ledger where we bring in our indirect materials. Both indirect materials and direct materials are requisitioned into the work in process inventory. Okay. Now, when we purchase our raw materials, very simple journal entry here, we're going to debit our raw materials inventory to increase it, in this case by $2,750, and credit accounts payable to eventually pay for that. Now, here's our materials ledger card and our alarm system. Here, we're going to bring in 5 units of this, and this is where it's located, the stock number, where it's located. It's in bin 7 in the storeroom, and once we get down to 2 units, that's the time we want to reorder, and we can reorder it with a minimum quantity of 1 unit. So here, what we received on receiving report C-71, we got 2 units, $600 each, $1,200 total. Then on March 8th, we issued one of those little beauties to the floor, and the cost of that was $600. And the balance was originally $600. Then we issued another 3, I purchased another 3 units here, and then we received another 2 units. So we keep a running balance here of how many units we have. Here's our beginning balance, etc. So when we had 1 unit here, we added these 2 to it here to get 1,800, and then we moved 1 out to the plant, which took our units down to 2, worth $1,200. So it's a running balance of how many units we have in this particular alarm system. Okay, so here's our materials requisition, and we have 3 of them here. For R46 for requisition, R47, and R48. And our alarm system here is shown at a total cost of $600, and then paint for $100, and away we go. We're wrecking those out to the floor to be used on this alarm system. Okay, so here's the journal entry. When we wreck this out to the plant, here's our job 15. Let's go back. Here's 15 here, 16 and 17. We're wrecking these into the specific job. So you can see here's the job number, and here are the direct materials going to those specific jobs. We're keeping track of each job's cost that way, and our total direct materials are here. And so when we do our journal entry, we're going to debit work in process inventory to increase it, and reduce raw materials inventory to reduce it by these direct materials that were wrecked into jobs Bravo 15, Bravo 16, and Bravo 17 as we use them. Okay, now we'll take a look at describing and recording the flow of labor costs in a job order costing system. Now this is done based on time tickets. It keeps track of the amount of time that our direct labor use on each one of these jobs. But we also have indirect labor. We have people that clean up the floor, some mechanics, those kinds of people that are not directly associated with the job, but still very important in keeping the plant clean and the equipment maintained and those kinds of things. Those are indirect labor, and they go into the factory overhead pool, just like indirect material did. Okay. So here's our time tickets, and we have a start time and an end time, and how much time was spent on each one of these jobs. Here's job 15, 16, and 17, and we have so many hours, hourly rate, and the amount. So here's $1,000 going to Bravo 15, and $2,000 going to job Bravo 16, and $1,200 going to Bravo 17. Okay, now we do the same thing. We trace these to specific jobs as we shown here, and then we would pen our journal entry, which would increase work in process inventory for this direct labor here, but factory wages payable are going to be credited for that amount. Factory wages payable. Then, now we're going to take a look at describing and recording the flow of overhead costs in a job order costing system. And here, this looks like a good place to stop this video. And when we return, we'll get into how we compute these overhead costs. Until that time, bye for now.